Welcome to the desert. This is where, unfortunately, the bulk of early Doctor Who has been deleted. Luckily, various media exists in one form or another, so these lost episodes and serials can be enjoyed by the public. We kick off with Galaxy 4, where the Doctor and company meet the monstrous-looking but peaceful-minded Rills and their wedding cake-shaped robots called Chumblies, and the beautiful-looking but rotten-to-the-core Dravens. Basically, it's a flip of the classic monster versus helpless female trope. This time, the monsters are female who are beautiful looking, and the monstrous looking Rills are peaceful thinkers. Anywho, it takes place on a dead or dying planet, and the Rills ultimately prove to be a great ally against the Dravens, who take pleasure in the suffering of others. That is really disturbing. The fact that they were supposed to be male antagonists who were made female at the last second really helped the overall story, because none of the female villain tropes are in this episode. Next, we come to Mission to the Unknown, aka Dalek Cutaway, where a group of space agents are investigating possible Dalek activity on the planet Kemble. And unfortunately, they find it with fatal results. This episode will be significant in a future serial, but for now, we come to the Mythmakers, where the Doctor and company end up getting roped into the waning days of the Trojan War. Vicky falls in love with a Trojan royal named Troyes, adopts the name Cressida, and decides to stay with him. And you might want to check out Overly Sarcastic Productions to find out more about the various Greek and Roman legends that this episode borrows from. That's Overly Sarcastic Productions on YouTube. Trust me, they're great. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Stephen, who has adopted the disguise of a dead Trojan soldier, Diomedes, are forced to come up with an idea to attack Troy. And yes, the Doctor builds the wooden horse, or has the wooden horse built. And it's an interesting episode because not only is it lost, but thanks to the audio and telesnaps, we find out that Agamemnon, who, according to Overly Sarcastic Productions, is a really evil person, is actually kind of sidelined by Odysseus, who in various legends is considered a hero, but in this story he's just a bully. He's like Bluto from the Popeye series. It's weird. Anyway, the comical nature of the episode is sort of jackknifed by the horrors of war towards the end of the serial, where the only royals left in Troy are Cassandra, who gets taken prisoner by Odysseus for Agamemnon. I'll leave that to your imagination and Overly Sarcastic Productions. And Troyes, who escapes Troy with Vicky to eventually rebuild Rome a few generations from now. Meanwhile, one of Cassandra's handmaidens, who believes she's dead or going to die, named Katerina, joins Team TARDIS, and they escape to the next adventure, the Daleks' Master Plan. Yep, it's back to Kemble, where the Daleks are working with Earth representative Mavek Chen and some reps from the outer galaxies to build a device called the Time Destructor in order to take over the universe. Of course, the delegates and Chen don't realize the Daleks plan to exterminate everyone who's not a Dalek and rule the universe themselves. Luckily, the Doctor, Stephen, Katarina, and new allies Brett Vaughn and Sarah Kingdom, respectively played by future Brigadier actor Nicholas Courtney and Who veteran Gene March, managed to prevent the Daleks from powering up the device and eventually using the device to destroy the Daleks themselves. And they even run afoul of the meddling monk, who I guess got his TARDIS working again, but managed to defeat him again, and ultimately win the day. Unfortunately, there is sort of a hollow victory feel to this serial, because this is the first time where companions die. Katarina gets flushed out an airlock to save the rest of the team from a bunch of criminals. Brett is gunned down by Sarah, who believes him a traitor early in the serial. Sarah succumbs to the effects of the Time Destructor, and even the Doctor gets heavily injured by its effects. Luckily, since he's so long-lived, he doesn't age rapidly, but he does get weakened. And unfortunately, they decide to have a Christmas episode smack dab in the middle of this very solemn, somber serial about death and destruction. It's called The Feast of Stephen, and it's kind of surreal. They end up in front of a police station, have to run afoul of the cops. They end up on a movie set and run afoul of the various directors and actors there. And at the very end, to make it a Christmas episode, the Doctor wishes the audience a happy holiday. Yeah. This serial is a bit drawn out, and it didn't have to be drawn out. At the very least, they could have saved the Christmas episode for maybe before or after. I don't know. Either way, on to the next adventure. The Massacre. Yeah, Doctor Who has taken a really dark turn. The Doctor and Stephen end up in France, this time on the eve of the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, where, as someone raised Catholic, I'm sorry to say, the Catholics are not painted in a very positive light. They basically cull a mass of Protestants, known at this time as Huguenots, and a lot of good people die needlessly. Some Huguenot guys who Stephen befriends, a Catholic abbot who was supposed to kill a Protestant admiral but failed to do so, who was also a dead ringer for the Doctor, the abbot I mean, and a servant girl named Anne Chaplet, who gets sent home by the Doctor in order to avoid getting mixed up in the Doctor's craziness. But Stephen doesn't like the fact that he basically could have sent this girl, or the Doctor could have sent this girl to her death. And once the TARDIS lands, Stephen leaves in a huff. And so the Doctor is alone with his thoughts for the first time in a long time. Now, back in the first adventure, way back in Unearthly Child, the Doctor was prepared to kill a caveman rather than be caught by his tribe. And Ian stayed his hand. Now, Stephen has left the TARDIS in a huff because he thinks the Doctor is still that callous. And we sort of get to see a vulnerable moment with the Doctor. It's very emotional. And then fate steps in, introducing us to Dorothea Dodo Chapman, or Chaplin, Chaplet, anyway, Dodo, who, as it turns out, might have been a descendant of that servant girl who most likely survived the massacre. So that sort of mends fences with the Doctor and Stephen, and they go off on the next adventure. Now, a lot of people didn't like Dodo. They thought she was too stupid, but I don't think she's stupid so much as oblivious. She gets distracted easily, but she's not stupid. Not in my humble opinion. Anywho, on to the next adventure. The Ark. The Doctor, Dodo, and Stephen end up on a large Ark ship populated by humans, cyclopses known as monoids, and various animals. They're leaving Earth because it's about to get swallowed up by the sun. Definitely the first time, but definitely not the last time. Unfortunately, Dodo has a small cold, and that disease has been eradicated from humanity for a long time, so she accidentally starts a plague. Luckily, the Doctor and company managed to save the day and leave, skipping ahead 7 centuries to when the ship is supposed to reach its new homeworld, only to find that the monoids, who apparently were less helpmate and more slave, have staged a rebellion and put the humans in a subservient position. Ultimately, when they land, however, the planet they're on turns out to be populated by invisible thought entities who insist the monoids and humans coexist peacefully, or else they gotta get out. Ultimately, it works out, and the Doctor and company go off on their next adventure, the Celestial Toymaker, where the Doctor has to match wits with a Q-like entity called the Celestial Toymaker, played by Michael Gough from the Batman movies. And he, Dodo, and Ian must play various types of games in order to stay alive. I'm not sure if this particular serial is going to get animated, because one of the antagonist characters plays a game of Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo that is not very kosher. They might end up dubbing over that if they ever do an animation. I don't know. But ultimately, the Doctor and company win out and leave. But not before the Doctor samples a bit of confiscated candy, which injures one of his teeth, leading to the Gunfighters, where the Doctor, in agony over his rotten tooth, pays a visit to Doc Holliday to get it extracted. Yay. Meanwhile, Dodo and Stephen run afoul of both the Clantons and the Earps in their mutual animosity, which ultimately boils over to the gunfight at the OK Corral. Now, the climax of this serial is pretty violent. It's a big gunfight, of course, but it's also very well choreographed. Not quite historically accurate, but decent enough. Also, this episode doesn't paint Doc Holliday in a very positive light. He was prepared to use the Doctor as a decoy while he slinks away like a coward. I'm pretty sure Val Kilmer never would have done that. Anywho, ultimately, Team TARDIS manages to escape and make it to what the Doctor believes is an idyllic, peaceful society, but as it turns out, it's populated by the savages. formerly known as the White Savages, but that had to be changed for obvious reasons. Now, you would think the savages are the people dressed like the cavemen from the first episode. Nope. Turns out the Utopian Society is vampire-like. It feeds off the life force and intellect of the people they subjugate in caves and in scrubland, treating them like animals, really. It's quite brutal, almost Nazi-like. But when the Doctor gets his life energy and intellect drained and funneled into the leader of the Utopian Society, he also gets the Doctor's sense of right and wrong. So, there you go. Ultimately, they destroy the machinery that's responsible for everything, and Stephen decides to stay behind and act as a sort of arbiter to help both societies come together in peace, much to Dodo's heartbreak. Next, we come to contemporary London, where this tower, which is a real thing, is set to link all computers together into one World Wide Web. And yet it's set in the 60s and not the late 80s, early 90s. What? Unfortunately, the computer called Wotan decides that it should take over humanity for its own good and goes all Skynet, hypnotizing people, including Dodo, who thankfully gets dehypnotized early on and sent to recuperate with a friend's family, and ultimately deciding to stay in London. Meanwhile, the Doctor has to contend with Wotan and its enslaved humans and a bunch of Dalek-like war machines that the humans have constructed. I really wish that these war machines would come back, because I want to see what they can do against the Daleks. Kind of like that battle with the spheroid robots, probably. Anywho, the Doctor and the military win out, and thanks to a reprogrammed war machine, Wotan is defeated, and the Doctor manages to leave without drawing too much attention. Except two new companions end up accidentally shanghaiing themselves in the TARDIS. Ben, a sailor, and Polly, the secretary of one of the computer techs, end up going into the TARDIS to give the Doctor back Dodo's key, and he didn't realize they were there until it was too late. Yep, the new Team TARDIS. So they end up going off, this time back in time to the pirate era, where the former companion of pirate captain Avery, who actually shows up in the Tennant era, no, the Smith era, and at first he's suspicious of the people, but ultimately helps them. But not before giving the Doctor a clue as to where Captain Avery's treasure is. Or at least the stuff he didn't dump overboard when the siren attacked. Ultimately, the Doctor and company are embroiled in a plot to get the treasure and a plot to hoodwink some smugglers who are in cahoots with the local governor called the Squire. And basically it's one big cluster bomb, culminating with the destruction of all the pirates, the redemption of the Squire, and basically basically talk like a pirate day. Although it wasn't that bad, in my humble opinion. I thought the pirates were convincing. Far more convincing than the bad southern accent or bad Texas accents of the characters and the gunfighters, who sort of emulate Steven's performance from The Chase. Well, not Steven. Who emulate Peter Purvis's performance in The Chase. Overall, it would be a nice serial to watch if they could find it, but it's not really mandatory to watch. What is mandatory to watch, however, is The 10th Planet, the last Hartnell era episode. Team TARDIS lands at the South Pole in the mid-80s, where a rocket is being monitored and is about to come back, only it gets thrown off course and destroyed by the gravity of a new planet entering the solar system, the lost 10th planet, Earth's twin, Mondas. This was back before Pluto was demoted to dwarf planet, so that's why it's called the 10th planet. Unfortunately, this 10th planet is sucking energy away from Earth and her people, and even the Doctor is affected. And with the effects of the Time Destructor, the Life Force Energy Drainer, and the stress of having a toothache, the Doctor's body is wearing a bit thin, according to him. Anyway, this is the first time we get introduced to the second most popular Doctor Who villain, the Cybermen. In this case, they're more cyborg than robots. They still look eerily human, and their sing-songy, semi-synthetic voices are just chilling to listen to, especially when they talk about killing and disregarding human life. It's really, really disturbing. Ultimately, Mondas drains too much energy from Earth, and while Earth recovers, Mondas goes full Death Star, blowing up and not even scratching Earth. Ultimately, the stress of it all is too much for the Doctor, though, and even though his adventures are far from over, as he says, he does have to do something drastic in order to survive. He regenerates for the first time. And that brings the Hartnell era of Doctor Who to an end, when next we meet, we get introduced to the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, the cosmic hobo, anti-establishment eccentric, who is sort of what the Doctor was meant to be. Overall, this season was hit hard by the junking, but the adventures, while maybe a bit hit and miss in places, are overall satisfying. And while the first Doctor did deserve a slightly better exit than what we got, Bill Hartnell was definitely a Doctor worth remembering, and certainly worth bringing back for future adventures. Until next time, this is Mr. J signing out. I'm reminding you, recorders are cool.